Long time no see. It's been a while since I've had time to sit down and make a video. Been busy with life stuff, working on my degree and such, and my leisure time has been dedicated both to a bunch of new game releases and actually playing a lot of Crusade in person, which involves a lot of painting since it turns out, you gotta make terrain and all that stuff. So, here's a couple images of my work to prove that I'm not a complete flake. We've got the Court of Seven-Headed Serpent here, some Red Brigade guys, an Artillery Witch. I've got a lot more going on, but, those are just a couple of them. All that aside, though, the topic I've decided to tackle today is a bit of a broader one than Warband List, which is playing the campaign. Since the official rules update is likely around the corner by the time this uploads, I didn't feel like doing a Warband update video just yet, but definitely have some plans to do them, especially for ones I haven't touched, such as the Alba Assault Detachment and Sloth for Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, which is what I'm playing IRL now. So, as you're likely aware, Trench Crusade is designed primarily to be played in a campaign format, which adds a mechanical progression that one can more easily attach a narrative to, and significantly changes the considerations one has when list building around things like consumables, glory, elites, and victory conditions. As this is a fairly expansive topic, I'm limiting the scope of the individual video to prevent me from going crazy. Today's topic is focusing on the actual winning of the campaign and how the scenarios play into this end goal, covering things like victory points, glory acquisition, and other metagame considerations. Oh yeah, also, here's some ASEBs. So, now, winning a Trench Crusade campaign is relatively straightforward. You get the most victory points, you win. While between two people you might reasonably just do a number of wins metric, the point system theoretically allows for multiple people to stay in the running for victory for longer and larger campaigns, and cuts down significantly on the possibility of ties and needing tiebreaker rounds and stuff like that, as the granularity means it's very unlikely for two players to end up at the exact same value at the end of a series of games. Also, as we'll see later, the fact that some scenarios allow for the loser to generate significant amounts of points theoretically rewards close games and disincentivizes giving up early. I will point out again that there's likely a rules update on the horizon of this video's release. Scenario specifics are liable to change, but barring a complete overhaul of the campaign system, this analysis at least should be usable as a foundation for how one approaches any given scenario in terms of their relevance to winning a campaign. In fact, as I was finishing making this, there's currently a campaign rules changelog that actually does affect scenario points, which tells me at least that this video's content will likely cover stuff in the main rulebook, since otherwise those changes would be in the main book. Likely, this is due to being unable to update text in the main rules due to needing to send in a finalized version for printing. I'll discuss those changes at the end. Now, not all scenarios are created equal, and which ones you'll get to play are chance-based on top of being locked to stages in the campaign. So, we'll see once we start looking at the scenarios more in depth, your campaign dynamics can shift very quickly depending on the scenario played. Unfortunately, this does theoretically create a situation where, due to scenario rules, it can be practically impossible for one to win the campaign. But a fairly easy home rule to avoid this is simply have one scenario roll for all participants in the campaign. This, in particular, really only matters for a couple outlier scenarios, but it is worth mentioning, and in fact they do get addressed a little bit later in the update. While you should obviously be attempting to win the games you play, how you go about that can depend on a number of things, but predominantly I have separated things into a fairly simplistic question: to aura farm or not? What I mean by this, of course, is how should your efforts be allocated between racking up excessive victory points or chasing glory objectives? Again, to reiterate, this isn't saying to completely ignore either, but the scale I'm providing is one that seeks to quickly answer whether you can keep that yeoman on the back objective you technically don't need to win at this point, or if you try to make the blind charge to score the glory point. Glory has nowhere near the amount of variation between scenarios that victory points do, but they do seem to split thematically more. This will make more sense as we start proceeding through the scenarios. So let's just jump into the first scenario. We'll be proceeding just numerically in the order of the main rules of PDF, skipping the Great War since it literally ends the game. Claim No Man's Land is actually one of the problem childs of the system, so it works as a strong starter for this discussion. Scenario is simple enough, symmetric, objective control with no fancy mechanics going on. You get a point per contested objective and 2 per fully controlled objective at the end of each turn. All the scenarios presented have had their maximum possible victory points shown, although this literally would only be achievable if you were actively bribing your opponent, and even in some cases it's still not possible, but it does a good job of highlighting the disparity in scenario potential. For this scenario, a maximum of 40 points is possible, but realistically the winner is coming away with around 15 or so points, as they likely keep their closest objectives fully controlled most of the game and contest two others or controls the center. The loser in this game, as long as they keep any models on their rear objectives and occasionally contest the center for at least a turn, can easily walk out with double-digit points. There is just frankly a crazy number of victory points up for grab in this game, and it's actually difficult to leave with less than 5 even as the loser, which for context is the maximum points awarded to the winner in some scenarios. Again, this is before the update, we'll adjust that later. This easily lands in the farming for points category, where even though the glory points aren't necessarily difficult for this scenario, pursuing them doesn't directly align with playing the objective, and a well-played loss in this scenario can literally earn you more points than, some combined victories. This is, of course, where the issue arises in a many-player campaign, as any pair that rolls this scenario can be catapulted so far in the lead that the top contenders can be decided right there, especially as a scenario that shows up both early and mid-campaign. A lucky player that gets this multiple times is pretty much guaranteed to be in the top brackets due to sheer mass of points involved, and anyone who doesn't get this scenario at least once has a massive gap to surmount. Now, onto the other end of the spectrum, you've got Relic Hunt. In this scenario, you're trying to claim objectives that disappear as the rounds go on, with an action-based claiming mechanic. Victory points are earned simply from claiming these objectives, with a respectable maximum of 16 and the winner usually earning around 7. Now, you may say, with that many points, why do you have to pay for points category as red? This is because the category isn't just asking about whether the scenario has good points, but whether dedicating effort towards generating victory points is both feasible and well rewarded. Which, for this case, the answer is no. With a short time and disappearing objectives, it is extremely difficult to get above the points necessary to win, even assuming you get all of your objective claim actions, which is barely a favored coin flip. So, even a player completely dominating the game is not likely to score significantly more victory points than just a standard winner. Meanwhile, the glory objectives for this scenario are very natural in the pursuit of victory, with 2 of them being easy objective-related ones, and the others being combat that would naturally arise from the claiming of the objectives, such as cover or multiple kills. So prioritizing them will not really harm your chances at victory, and therefore is a great scenario to do so. Hunt for the Heroes is just an overall well-valued scenario. Location control with some bonus targets sprinkled in. This of course makes it hard to explicitly say the victory points you'll get, but overall there's a lot involved in this scenario. With scoring at the end of each round and a hefty chunk of points for target kills, a well-playing player can pretty consistently get double digits even if you're losing. So I highly suggest trying to stay in this scenario for as long as possible, as even stalling some objectives for a round or 2 can earn you some valuable points. While technically you don't know how many points you'll have until the end of it, in this scenario your performance will dramatically affect your score, so focusing on generating those points is your priority. The glory points are worthwhile even though there's fewer total. Most of them are very tied to the gameplay that would be earning you victory points in the first place, with some mild deviation potentially worthwhile if you've already got enough elite kills to be confident in your victory point score. Trench warfare is asymmetrical, which typically means the points aren't great, and worth talking about how balanced it is between the attacker and defender in terms of points likely to earn. Overall though, the number of points in this game is very low, with earning more than a minimum of 5 points from victory requires nearly complete battlefield domination, so the scenario does not reward focusing on points very well at all for the defender, who can only earn 6 points if they manage to have none of their territory contested, while the attacker theoretically can earn 9 points. Now, one may say the attacker has a good enough range to be worth focusing their efforts towards it, but the reality is that's only happening if the defenders have no models in their territory, which again is only really happening in the cases where they failed to fail a morale roll multiple turns in a row, and got completely tabled instead. Not something you can rely on, so more often than not you'll be lucky to earn more than a minimum of 5 points. Since winning is going to get you all the points anyways, may as well farm for glory points during the game. Most of them are completely natural and in standard game flow, such as killing units in trenches and passing morale tests. Supply raid is an asymmetric scenario that is hard to say what to focus in terms of point farming or glory points, notably due to the evaluation being attacker or defender dependent. In short, if you're the defender, you should be hitching yourself to the victory point farm, whereas the attacker has more favor in glory points. I will say that even the attacker still can earn a good number of victory points, even in a losing situation you can secure a win's worth of points But due to the nature of point generation coming significantly just from raw kills, you can easily detour to glory points without compromising victory chances. The defender has a worse time with glory as they are biased towards the attacker in terms of practicality, but they have a much higher potential number of points available to them, so a defender playing the objectives well can easily get double-digit victory points with a couple kills. Armored Train is one of those scenarios that on paper has a huge wealth of victory points to go around, but in practice you'll be lucky to crack the double digits due to the actual difficulty of the objective in combination with the random cargo numbers and having to sacrifice a model per score. As a result, this game mode has a very high amount of inertia, where if a player gets into a dominant position to start scoring at all, they can pretty much end up scoring most all of the points on the board, game turns permitting of course, while the loser will be lucky to get away with 1 or 2 score attempts. Glory points in this scenario are particularly difficult, as 2 are just flat out hard to do, and then 2 of them are highly situational, focusing on the central machine gun. The other 2 are easy, but as a result, even if trying very hard, you're going to be lucky to get more than 2 glory points out of this scenario, and doing so may cost you the game in the first place, so I don't recommend focusing on anything other than trivial ones. Your best bet for this scenario is getting a secure enough position and having enough fodder to really start earning a good amount of victory points. Storming the Shores is one of the asymmetric narrative scenarios with which the trend for them is to be less valuable towards winning the campaign, funny enough. Now, the scenario has multiple win conditions that can just end the game early, but in regards to victory points, it seems to be very unclear when points are supposed to be tallied, so I've gone with a conservative estimate that each objective can only be secured once, meaning the total points possible comes out to 15, but otherwise this scenario would become ridiculous on the point farming side for the defender. As written currently, since 5 points is scored for each objective building taken control of, if that's not meant to read as have control of at the end of the game, the defender could just spawn their models outside the objectives turn 1, move them in, score 15 points, and then out, in, out, repeat this process. This doesn't seem how it was meant to be played though, but I do believe the wording could be more in line with the other scenarios here. With the assumption of these not being re-scoreable points, this scenario realistically will not get you too many points unless you completely dominate. But with the instant end conditions being relatively natural to the game flow, you're unlikely to get more than 10 even when trying, and just playing to win will pretty much get you there anyways, so desperately focusing on points isn't going to net you much. The glory points for this scenario are overall more difficult than many scenarios, with some conditional elements to them, which normally would have me say they're not worth focusing on, but in this case, since the points are pretty much just allocated to the winner and loser without much performance variation, one might as well try to aim for them, especially since the glory objectives, while difficult, are not the ones that you necessarily put you into bad positions to try and achieve. Last of the main scenarios is Dragon Hunt, which, bucking the trend of the last few scenarios, is actually a good farming scenario for both types of points. It is important to note that it's actually possible to fail this scenario for both players, resulting in a draw. So you definitely want to be playing objective here, otherwise you don't even get to keep the victory points you've earned during the scenario. This does make the scenario particularly vulnerable to griefing if your opponent really wants to force a draw, but otherwise there's points abound in this scenario. You can get 4 whole victory points just from knocking the dragon down once, with a large amount of total points, and if you're winning the scenario, you're very likely to cross into double digits, and the loser can feasibly still earn a win's worth of points just from some objective play. Since you can lose and get 0 points, you really want to focus that first and foremost. Glory points, fortunately, are pretty easy in this scenario. With some very solid objective overlap, you can feasibly walk away with at least 1 without much difficulty. It's only due to how crucial the objective play in this scenario is that I have to say you shouldn't go too deep on gathering them in case that doesn't look like the dragon will be dealt with. Last and kinda least, at least before the update, we have the random scenario generator scenarios. Because these guys don't have a fixed deployment, making estimates about how they usually go is even more ballpark than the other scenarios, so I'm just going to give a very quick analysis of them altogether, since in terms of points and glory, they're very similar. Notably, they even share glory point missions, but universally these glory missions revolve around things like specialized kills or blood marker utilization, so relatively easy to do compared to many more situational glory objectives on the main scenarios. Lightning round here. Attrition is the best scenario for both victory and glory points due to an easy objective that scales victory points for both the loser and winner. Warband composition will affect this a bit regarding chaff or elite lists due to the flat score per model on top of cost. As the glory objectives are very kill-oriented, a scenario all about just getting kills is going to lead you to having no reason not to try and get them. Taking hold only has points from winning the whole game, and a minimum possible number of them at that, so no reason to put extra effort into farming since you physically can't. As the glory objectives will be likely friendly to the main objective in this scenario, you might as well put your effort into getting them. Sabotage, again, only gives minimum points and none to the loser, but has a slightly higher playing for points priority due to the fact the glory objectives are less in sync with the main objective than the previous scenarios. Still though, may as well chase them since you're not going to be getting any better results from performance. Over the Top has scaling victory points and even allows a loser to earn some, so it's decent for trying to get some points, but the range isn't high enough to warrant extraneous behavior. Glory points are again very conducive to your normal winning game plan, so have at 'em. Breakthrough has a much higher victory point ceiling than most of the random scenarios, but I give it a mixed review for that purpose due to the degree to which one must choose between playing for glory points or winning in most cases, as the game mode has you removing your own units from the board, inherently lessening your chances of earning those points. Your points can vary pretty wildly depending on how hard you try to push the objective, so definitely a more dynamic scenario. And finally, we have Retrieve, which is another all or nothing scenario, with 5 points of victory and 0 for losing. Again, since winning efficiently tends to conflict with the glorious kills you need for glory points in this scenario, you can't give the complete green flag to chase them. But still, if you get into a fairly safe position, it can be worthwhile to pivot your focus. Of course, just as I was ready to upload this video, I noticed they added a change log for the campaign, so we'll briefly go over the relevant parts here. Most notably, 2 of these scenarios do not exist in the current main rulebook, implying we will see them in the full release. These are Hill 223 and Fields of Glory. This further solidifies that they had a finalized version that they can't touch, because why else would you put it here rather than in the main book, since you only care about that value of points if you're playing the campaign regardless. Relic Hunt doubling the victory points does make the total points more easily enter the double digits in a close game, but doesn't fundamentally change the structure since, as mentioned, there's really not much more you can do to increase the number of points you'd earn via gameplay. This just means the overall scenario is now more valuable. Storming the Shores getting 4 times the victory points is again similar, where the scenario structure doesn't allow you to earn really more point sources unless you're completely dominating, but now the whole scenario will earn you a very large chunk of points. This reinforces my interpretation of the rules of Storming the Shores as well, as otherwise this scenario would earn an absolutely ridiculous number of points for the defender. Realistically, this makes the scenario one of the higher scoring game modes. Trench Warfare getting the 3 times multiplier puts it into the double digits range far more comfortably, which again, much like the other 2 scenarios, just increase the value of the scenario. There's not much range in terms of victory points you can get even with dominant gameplay, so you'll just kind of naturally come away with more. Last but not least, the random scenarios now are all brought up to the 20 point mark, which makes them all much more valuable, obviously, but again, most of them are all or nothing gameplay, so you either get the 10 or 20 regardless of performance. Definitely a more attractive situation for the loser though than before, as you can still end up chasing some scenarios winners with that 10 points. The fact that pretty much any scenario I flagged as red for the play for points category got these point buffs at least tells me my sensibilities are somewhat aligned with developers, so now it's kind of nice. Anyways, glad to be back. Probably won't make any warband videos immediately since the main release update is just around the corner, hopefully by the time this goes up, but we'll probably, cover some more general stuff like this if that interests you guys. Thanks for watching.